The object was not supposed to be there. Sensor analyst Varath Khan had reviewed 17,000 stellar debris signatures in her career with the Keth Dominion survey fleet, and she knew what dead things looked like. She knew the electromagnetic silence of a gutted civilization. She knew the thermal profile of cooling wreckage, the way radiation bloomed and decayed across a star system that had stopped fighting back. The object in Sector Grid 7, Theta, did not match any of those profiles. It was small, approximately 4 meters in length, tumbling slowly in a degrading orbit around the third planet, which the Dominion's xenocartographers had already catalogued, designated, and closed the file on. The file said, Extinct asterisk. The file said, Non-recoverable asterisk. The file had the authorization stamp of Fleet Executor Davinrel himself, and Fleet Executor Davinrel did not make mistakes. But the object was tumbling, and something inside it was still transmitting. Varath Khan almost didn't flag it. That fact would haunt her for the rest of her life. The 3 seconds she spent with her manipulator limb hovering over the archive function, already composing the notation in her mind. Debris artifact, residual power signature, non-significant. 3 seconds in which the history of the Keth Dominion and every civilization that had ever trembled at its name balanced on the edge of a filing error. She flagged it instead. The signal, once she isolated it and ran it through the harmonic decoder, turned out to be a loop, 47 seconds long, repeating without variation, broadcasting on a frequency that the Keth hadn't used in 3 generations because it was considered embarrassingly primitive. The kind of frequency you'd use if you wanted to be heard by something that didn't know any better. The loop contained 2 components. The first was a navigational marker, latitude, longitude, depth coordinates for a location on the planet's surface. The second component took Varath Khan 4 minutes to identify, because she initially classified it as signal degradation. It was a heartbeat. Not a metaphor, not a structural rhythm in the data. An actual biological heartbeat, recorded and encoded and fired into space on a dying battery, repeating once every 47 seconds like a question that refused to stop being asked. We are here, we are here, we are here. Fleet Executor Davinrel was not a being who experienced what most species would call discomfort. The Keth had, over 11,000 years of expansion, engineered many of their more destabilizing emotional responses into irrelevance. Doubt was inefficient. Anxiety was a processing error. The sensation of being wrong, truly, structurally wrong about something foundational, was a feeling Davinrel had not experienced since his early training cycles. He experienced it now, standing in the analysis chamber aboard the asterisk Eternal Enumeration asterisk, staring at Varath Khan's report. How many? He asked. The signal is singular, Varath Khan said. 1 transmission source, 1 confirmed survivor. That is not what I asked. Davinrel turned from the projection. His secondary optical clusters were fixed on her in a way that made the atmosphere in the room feel several degrees colder. The beacon encodes coordinates, a asterisk meeting point asterisk. One does not encode a meeting point for a singular being. He paused. How many were there when we assessed the species as non-recoverable? Varath Khan pulled up the original survey file. She had already read it 6 times since flagging the beacon. She had been hopping she'd misread it the first 5. Estimated population at time of assessment, she said quietly, 11 billion. The room did not make a sound. And our assessment rated their survival probability as 0, she said, 0.003% rounding threshold excluded, effectively 0. Davinrel looked back at the projection, the small tumbling object, the repeating heartbeat, the coordinates on the surface of a planet that was supposed to be silent. Send a contact team, he said. Non-combat configuration. I want to know what we missed. He didn't say asterisk if asterisk we missed anything. Varath Khan noticed that. She filed it away the same way she'd filed the beacon, with the instinct that it mattered more than it appeared to. The planet was called Earth. The species called themselves humans. The Dominion's xenolinguistic archive contained 412 words of their primary language, assembled from radio signal intercepts conducted 18 months prior, during the initial survey. The intercepts had been assessed as culturally primitive, technologically pre-contact, psychologically fragile. The assessment had noted with particular confidence that the humans demonstrated extreme vulnerability to organizational collapse under external pressure, based on their historical record of internal conflict, economic instability, and a documented tendency to fracture along ideological lines when faced with unified external threat. The Dominion had, based on this assessment, designated Earth for what they clinically called induced quiescence asterisk. Not destruction. The Keth were not wasteful. Merely the systematic dismantling of human space-capable infrastructure, the elimination of their communication networks, and the deployment of a low-frequency atmospheric interference field that caused cascading failure in electronic systems globally. In other words, they had taken everything away. Every satellite, every power grid, every server, every radio tower. They had left the humans with their bare hands and whatever they could remember. The assessment model predicted social dissolution within 6 months, warlordism within 8, functional extinction, not through direct violence, but through the inevitable collapse of a civilization too complex and too interdependent to survive without its own infrastructure, within 30 to 40 months. The assessment was now 41 months old. The contact team descended through clouds that smelled of wood smoke. Sub-Commander Ithrek Voss had led 43 contact operations. He was chosen for this mission specifically because of his record with post-extinction assessments. Civilizations that had been almost wiped out but not quite, where someone had to walk into the wreckage and take account. He had never walked into wreckage that looked like this. The landing site, a cleared field approximately 3 kilometers from the beacon coordinates, was surrounded by tree line on 3 sides. His team of 6 emerged from the shuttle in full atmospheric suits, carrying standard contact equipment, translators, biological samplers, the kind of long-range sensors that could detect life signs through 30 meters of solid rock. The sensors immediately registered 412 life signs within 1 kilometer. Then they recalibrated, because that number seemed wrong. The recalibrated reading came back, 6,714. That cannot be accurate, said Specialist Doranthes, who was running the sensor array. She shook the equipment, which was not a scientifically validated troubleshooting method, but which she performed anyway with feeling. The number did not change. There's a structure, said the pilot Rien Vaz, pointing toward the tree line. Camouflaged. Significant camouflage. I almost missed it against the thermal. Ithrek Voss looked where she was pointing. At first he saw only trees. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw that the trees weren't entirely trees, that the shapes between them were too regular, that the branches overhead formed deliberate patterns, that what he had taken for undergrowth was, in places, a woven material he had no classification for. Someone had built a city inside the forest, and made it look like the forest had been there first. He was still processing this when a human walked out of the trees and stood at the edge of the field, watching them. It was a woman. She was perhaps 5.5 feet tall, dressed in layers of clothing that mixed manufactured and handmade elements in a way that suggested long practice at making things last. She had a device slung over one shoulder, something mechanical, with a long barrel that Ithrek Voss's combat awareness categorized before his cultural protocols could intervene. A weapon, a projectile weapon. Primitive by Keth standards, but held with the relaxed familiarity of something she'd been carrying for years. She didn't raise it. She didn't retreat. She just stood there and looked at them across the field the way someone looks at a thing they've been expecting for a very long time. "You're smaller than I thought you'd be," she said. The translator processed this in 0.3 seconds. Ithrek Voss spent considerably longer deciding how to respond. Her name was Sergeant Major Alara Voss. The surname coincidence with his own was something Ithrek Voss would later decide was the universe being unsophisticated about irony. She was 43 years old, former military, former civil engineer, currently the closest thing to a head of security that the settlement called Harrow had produced in the 14 months since it stopped being a refugee camp and started being something else. She walked them into Harrow without hesitation, which was either confidence or calculated risk, and Ithrek Voss spent the entire walk trying to determine which. Harrow was extraordinary, not by Keth standards of construction. By those standards, it was almost amusingly crude, wood and stone and reclaimed materials assembled with more ingenuity than precision. What was extraordinary was its density. They had built asterisk upward inside the canopy, platform structures connected by rope bridges and ladders, with living spaces distributed vertically through the forest in a pattern that, he realized slowly, was deliberately designed to make aerial counting impossible. From above, Harrow looked like forest. From a sensor sweep, it looked like a low-population settlement. You had to be standing inside it to understand what it actually was. "How long did this take to build?" he asked. "Depends on what part you're asking about," Alara said. "The bones, 8 months. The camouflage, that was first. That was month 1. Month 1, after our interference field was deployed." She glanced at him sideways. "You mean after you turned off the lights?" "Yeah." "You prepared for this?" She stopped walking, turned to look at him fully for the first time. "Did we?" It was not a genuine question. It was something else, and Ithrek Voss filed it alongside the meeting point coordinates and the heartbeat signal and the 6,714 life signs, because he had the growing sense that everything about this situation was something other than what it appeared. The report Ithrek Voss filed that evening was 37 pages long. Fleet Executor Davanrel read it in full, which was unusual, and then read it again, which had never happened before in Varath Khan's experience of working for him. "They maintained organizational cohesion," Davanrel said. He wasn't reading aloud, he was processing aloud, which was a thing he did when a problem was too large to hold in a single cognitive thread. The infrastructure collapse should have fragmented their social organization into competing territorial units within 6 months. The model is reliable. It has been validated across 41 prior applications. "The model may not have accounted for certain variables," Varath Khan said carefully. "Such as?" "The prior military and engineering experience of their organizational leadership. The apparent," she hesitated, "deliberate preparation they undertook before the interference field was deployed." Davanrel went very still. "Before?" "Yes." Subcommander Ithrek Voss's report notes that the forest settlement's camouflage infrastructure was the first element constructed. Month 1. The interference field was deployed on day 4 of month 1. The camouflage was asterisk already underway when we eliminated their satellite network. The silence that followed was a different quality than earlier silences. This one had weight to it. "They knew," Davanrel said. "They knew before we acted." "There is another possibility," Varath Khan said, because she was the kind of analyst who needed all possibilities on the table even when they were worse than the one already there. They didn't know specifically. They simply planned for an unspecified catastrophic infrastructure failure, as a general practice. Davanrel looked at her. They routinely prepared for the complete collapse of their civilization. Their historical record suggests this was not considered unusual. They called it, she consulted the translator notation, prepping. It appears to have been a widespread cultural practice, particularly among certain subpopulations. The fleet executor turned back to the star map. Earth hung in the center of it, small and blue-green and silent, 37 pages of surprises orbiting it in the space between where they thought it was and where it actually turned out to be. The Harrow settlement, he said, single site. Varath Khan felt the familiar sensation of information she did not want to deliver. Ithrak Voss's report notes that Alara Voss, the settlement security coordinator, referenced the beacon as an asterisk demonstration site. His report flags this terminology but does not resolve it. I believe. She paused. I believe it is possible that Harrow was specifically selected to be found, that it was shown to us. Shown to us, Davanrel repeated, as a demonstration. Yes. Of what? And that was the question that kept Varath Khan awake that night, running models that all came back with the same answer: insufficient data. She had flagged a beacon. The beacon had opened a door, and she was increasingly convinced that something on the other side of that door had very deliberately left it ajar. Ithrak Voss requested a second meeting with Alara Voss the following morning. She agreed without hesitation, which continued to unsettle him, and they sat across from each other at a table that was made from what appeared to be a salvaged shipping container lid balanced on tree stumps, which was either resourceful or poetic or both. Tell me about the other settlements, he said. She poured something hot into 2 cups from a ceramic container and pushed one toward him. He didn't drink it. She noticed but didn't comment. What makes you think there are other settlements? You called Harrow a demonstration site. Did I? In passing, deliberately in passing. He leaned forward slightly. I am trying to understand your situation accurately so that I can represent it accurately to my commanding officers. I believe that is in your interest. She wrapped both hands around her cup, looked at it, then back at him. There are other settlements, she said. I won't tell you how many or where, not yet, but I want you to understand something. She set the cup down. When your ships showed up 18 months ago, we ran every piece of analysis we had on you. Capabilities, likely intentions, decision-making patterns. We made predictions. And most of them were right. The infrastructure strike was right. The timeline was right. A pause. The extinction timeline was wrong, obviously, but we knew your model would predict it that way. That was the point. Ithrak Voss was quiet for 4 seconds, which for a Keth was a very long time. You wanted us to believe you were dying. We wanted you to stop watching, she said. There's a difference. He went back to the asterisk eternal enumeration and wrote a second report. This one was 9 pages long because he spent most of it trying to locate language precise enough to convey the following. We have been observing them. They have been observing us observing them. And the gap between what they have shown us and what they have not shown us is larger than anything I can currently measure. Fleet Executor Davanrel dispatched 12 survey drones to conduct a full-spectrum planetary sweep. This was the moment Ithrak Voss later identified as the decision that changed everything, though he didn't understand why until much later. The drones found 43 settlements. Each one was camouflaged. Each one was dense. Each one had been built with the same architectural philosophy as Harrow, distributed vertically, thermally masked, deliberately invisible from the kind of sensor sweep the Keth used in routine surveillance. 43 settlements. Combined population estimate, 480,000. Against 11 billion, this was almost nothing. This was 0.004% survival, which was statistically consistent with extinction, which was why the model had been satisfied and the file had been closed. But the 43 settlements were not randomly distributed across the planet's surface. When Davanrel overlaid their locations on a map, he stared at the result for a long time. They formed a pattern, not a crude pattern, not the accidental geometry that emerges from populations choosing defensible high ground or water access. A deliberate pattern. Precise asterisk pattern, with each settlement positioned at intervals that created overlapping communication ranges using low-technology radio equipment. interlocking fields of geographic awareness. And when he modeled their potential production and population growth trajectories forward by 20 years, a civilization-level recovery network that was quietly, patiently, and completely invisibly rebuilding itself. They hadn't survived. They had asterisk restructured. Sir. Verath Khan's voice carried a note he hadn't heard from her before, something pressed flat by professionalism but not entirely contained. The drone sweep has returned a secondary finding. He waited. The beacon we initially detected, sensor analyst filing, 41 days ago, was not the first one. The archival search found 17 prior signals from Earth's orbital region, all using the same primitive frequency, all dismissed by automated systems as debris artifact or signal noise over the past 38 months. 17 signals. 17 attempts to be detected. They were calling us, Davinrel said. They were calling asterisk someone, Verath Khan said. Anyone who might come looking. Any Keth vessel with a sensor analyst who didn't immediately file them as non-significant. Her voice was very controlled. For over 3 years, they have been quietly, consistently broadcasting a signal that says we are here, on the assumption that eventually someone would listen. The fleet executor looked at the star map, at the small blue-green planet, at 43 invisible settlements arranged in a pattern that looked, now that he knew what he was seeing, less like survival and more like the skeleton of something waiting to grow flesh back. Why, he said, why do they want to be found? They successfully evaded our surveillance for 41 months. Why break that now? Verath Khan didn't answer immediately. Sir, she said finally, I think they want to asterisk negotiate. The negotiation request came through official channels 6 hours later. A human representative, not Alara Voss, a different voice, one that spoke Keth Standard with an accent that suggested they had spent the past 3 years learning it from recordings, contacted the asterisk Eternal Enumeration directly and requested a formal diplomatic meeting at a neutral location. Davinrel almost declined. The reflex was strong. The Keth did not negotiate with extinct species, but he looked at the settlement map for the 3rd time at the pattern that shouldn't exist, and he sent a confirmation instead. The meeting location was a high plateau, 3 days' travel from Harrow, accessible by shuttle. When the Keth delegation arrived, they found a single human waiting for them beside a fire. He was not what any of them expected. He was old, perhaps 65, by human age standards, thin in the particular way of people who had learned to eat efficiently rather than abundantly. He wore a heavy coat and carried nothing that looked like a weapon. He sat on a folding camp chair next to the fire, and when the Keth shuttle landed and Davinrel stepped out with his security detail, the man looked up with the unhurried expression of someone who had been sitting by fires and waiting for a long time and had made a kind of peace with it. Fleet Executor, the man said in accented but precise Keth Standard, I'm Dr. Samuel Chen. I was the Secretary General of the United Nations before your people turned off the internet. A faint, dry smile. I've been practicing this conversation in my head for about 3 years. Apologies if I've over-rehearsed. Davinrel sat across from him. His security detail remained standing, which the man noted without alarm. You speak our language, Davinrel said. We had your communications for 18 months before you acted. Long enough. Dr. Chen poured something from a thermos into a second cup and extended it toward Davinrel, who did not take it. The man set it on the ground between them anyway, unconcerned. We also have your technical literature. Fragments of it, your ships broadcast on frequencies you consider internal. We listened. For how long? Long enough to understand that your civilization makes decisions based on efficiency models, projected outcomes, resource value. Dr. Chen looked at the fire. We wanted to understand how you think before we let you know we were still here. You chose when to reveal yourselves. We chose when the moment was useful. He looked back at Davinrel directly. That's what I need you to understand. Not that we survived, though we did. What I need you to understand is that we chose this moment, not desperation, not accident, choice. Davanrel studied the old man's face. What is it you believe you are in a position to offer the Keth Dominion? Dr. Chen reached into his coat and produced a small folded paper, actual paper, handwritten, and held it out. Davanrel did not take it. The man unfolded it himself and read aloud. 43 confirmed settlements. Current combined population approximately 480,000. Projected population at current recovery rate within 20 years, 60 million. Projected rebuild of industrial capacity, 15 years. Space-capable launch systems, we've been working on that for 2 years. We'll have something functional within 6 months. He refolded the paper. We are not asking for mercy. We're offering a trade. You have nothing we require. You have 41 other civilizations you've applied the same suppression model to, Dr. Chen said, not sharply. Quietly, the way you say something you've verified 17 times and are now simply statting as geometry. We know because we found 17 of them on our own radio frequencies before you turned ours off. Survivors, small groups, some of them, but alive, rebuilding. He paused. Your model says they're extinct. They're not. They're doing what we did. Some of them don't know about each other. The fire popped. A spark lifted and died. We can find them, Dr. Chen said. We're good at finding things that don't want to be found. We have 3 years of practice. He looked at the fleet executor across the low flames. The Keth built an empire on an assessment model that has been wrong at least 42 times. We're offering to show you what you missed. In exchange for recognition, status, room to rebuild without interference. Davanrel was silent for a long time. You are 42 civilizations, Chen added very quietly. We are one. We have the map. Back aboard the asterisk eternal enumeration asterisk, Verath Khan was already running the numbers, because she had long since stopped waiting for orders before beginning to understand something. She pulled every suppression file, ran survival projections with the corrected variables, accounting for population subsets with military or survival experience, accounting for pre-existing preparedness culture, accounting for the adaptive capacity her original model hadn't weighted heavily enough because it was, she now admitted to herself, a variable that was difficult to quantify. How do you put a number on asterisk willingness to continue asterisk? The corrected model came back with a range. At the low end, 9 of the 41 other designated extinct civilizations had non-zero survival populations. At the high end, 31. She sat with that number for a while. 31 civilizations that the Dominion's records said were gone. 31 closed files. 31 extinction events that might, if you went looking the way humans had gone looking, turn out to be rooms full of people building things in the dark, learning the Conqueror's language from intercepted transmissions, and waiting for the right moment to knock on the door. She sent the analysis to Davanrel with a single annotation. The assessment model we have used for 11,000 years was optimized to detect the end of civilizations. It was not designed to detect civilizations that refuse to end. Davanrel returned to the asterisk eternal enumeration 3 days later. He did not speak to anyone for several hours. Then he called Ithrek Voss and Verath Khan to his command chamber. The human representative, he said. Dr. Chen. He said something at the end of our meeting that I have not shared in any formal report. They waited. He said, you should know that we made a decision early on about what we were willing to lose. We decided there was no number, not settlements, not people, not years. There was no point at which we were going to decide it wasn't worth it anymore. And then he said, Davanrel paused in a way that Verath Khan had never seen him pause before. We know that doesn't make sense to you. We know that from everything you've read about us, everything you assessed, you thought that was our weakness. It took us a while to understand it was the only thing that mattered. Ithrek Voss said nothing. I have been a fleet executor for 32 years, Davanrel continued. In that time I have assessed over 200 species. I have applied the suppression model 67 times. In every case, the model's central assumption held, that a civilization, when faced with sufficient loss, will eventually make a rational calculation and stop. He looked at both of them. Our entire strategic architecture is built on that assumption. Varath Khan understood before he finished. Her processor equivalent of a stomach dropped. It has never been tested, she said. It has never been tested against a species that doesn't make that calculation, Davinrel agreed. We have never encountered in 67 applications a civilization that looked at sufficient loss and simply continued. What do we do? Ithrikvas asked. Davinrel was quiet for a moment. We accept the negotiation, he said. We make the trade, we take the map. Another pause, and then we audit every suppression file we have ever closed. He turned back to the window. Stars. The small blue-green planet. 43 invisible cities in the dark, arranged in a pattern that looked like a spine, like the skeleton of something that had not yet decided to be finished growing. Do you know what the most alarming part of Dr. Chen's offer was? He said. He didn't wait for an answer. He brought paper, handwritten. He had the population data, the projected recovery curves, the timeline on the launch systems, all of it memorized or written by hand. No electronics, no system we could interfere with. He had spent 3 years making himself entirely unable to be switched off. He let out a slow breath. He was not there to ask for help. He was there to demonstrate something. He wanted us to see that everything we used against them, they had already built around. The ships appeared 6 months later. Not from Earth's surface. Davinrel had expected that. What he had not expected was the direction. The Keth early warning array at the edge of the solar system picked them up first. It was a routine scan, automated, the kind of sensor sweep that ran itself every 4 hours and typically produced nothing of note. The automated system logged the contact, generated an alert, and flagged it for review. The review officer called Davinrel at 300 shipboard time. Her voice stripped of everything except the specific controlled flatness that indicated she was managing something she didn't have emotional vocabulary for yet. Fleet Executor, you need to see the long-range sensor array. He was in the command center within 3 minutes. The display was already running. He stared at it. Thousands. Not 43 settlements. Not 480,000 survivors. Thousands of ships, emerging from the outer system on vectors that placed their origin point approximately 4 light-months out, which meant they had been in transit for a significant period, which meant they had launched before the negotiation, before Dr. Chen had sat down by the fire and offered a map. What are those? Davinrel said, and it came out flat and quiet in the way that things come out when the brain has skipped the processing step. Varath Khan was already at her station, pulling everything the sensors could give her. The hull signatures are, she stopped. They're not human, not Keth. These are, another pause. I have 17 match candidates in the archive, 17 different species. Suppression file designates. The ships continued to appear. Her count climbed, 1,200, 3,000, 7,000. They found them, Ithrikvas said from behind them. His voice was strange. The humans found the other 41 civilizations, and he stopped because the math was finishing itself without him. The launch timeline. Dr. Chen said 6 months for a space-capable system, but they already had ships. No, Davinrel said, and something in his voice silenced the room. No, look at the launch vectors again. These ships did not come from Earth. They came from * 4 light-months out. They launched before Dr. Chen made contact with us, before the beacon was answered. He looked at Varath Khan. Before Varath Khan almost filed the beacon as non-significant. The room absorbed this. This was not a plan that began when we found the beacon, Davinrel said slowly. The beacon was found. The negotiation was offered. The trade was made. And in parallel, completely independent of all of that, this fleet has been assembling in the outer dark for how long? How long does it take to reach 4 light months from Earth at the propulsion level they've been estimated to have? Varath Khan's hands moved across the display. At estimated technological capacity, she stopped again. Sir, they couldn't have reached 4 light months at estimated capacity, not from Earth. So either our technological assessment was also wrong. Or they had help, she said, or both. The ships kept coming. The count passed 10,000, 15,000. He sat by that fire, Ithrik Voss said quietly, and he offered us a map and a trade, and the whole time this fleet was already here. He was not there to negotiate from weakness, Davanrel said. No. He was there to negotiate from a position he hadn't yet shown us. The fleet executor was still, completely still in the way of a being recalculating something very large. He showed us the survivors, the settlements. He gave us the proof of human resilience, the proof that our model was wrong, the thing our institutional ego needed to see in order to open the negotiation. He gave us exactly what we needed to say yes. A beat. And then he went home and waited for us to notice what he hadn't shown us yet. Varath Khan thought about the 47-second beacon. The heartbeat. 17 ignored signals over 38 months, each one dismissed as debris artifact or signal noise by automated systems optimized to categorize things they'd seen before. She thought about Dr. Chen's folded paper and his thermos of hot liquid and his dry, tired smile. And she thought about a man who had spent 3 years in the dark practicing a conversation in a language he taught himself from intercepted transmissions. And she thought about what it meant to have no number, to make a decision early on that there was no point at which it wouldn't be worth it anymore. She thought about 11 billion people and 480,000 and the gap between those numbers, and what it cost to stand up from that gap and fold a piece of paper and sit down by a fire and choose your moment. What do we do? She asked. Davanrel looked at the thousands of ships from 17 extinct civilizations, assembled in the dark beyond the edge of the solar system, flying human navigational vectors, coordinated on human communication frequencies, pointing at the heart of a dominion that had spent 11,000 years building an empire on the assumption that loss, at sufficient scale, would always produce surrender. We answer them, he said. He paused. Carefully. The negotiation that followed took 14 months. Davanrel would describe it later, in private communications that were not intended for the historical record and therefore survived into it, as the single most disorienting sustained experience of my career. Not because the humans or their allied civilizations threatened violence, they didn't, or at least not explicitly. Not because their demands were unreasonable, they weren't, or at least not structurally. What disoriented him was the pace. The patience. Dr. Chen's team never rushed. They never escalated in the ways the Dominion's negotiation models predicted. Every time Davanrel's advisors expected them to press an advantage, they paused instead. Every time it seemed like frustration should produce concession-seeking, it produced something that looked remarkably like willingness to wait indefinitely. You negotiate, Davanrel told Chen during the 9th month, as though time means nothing to you. We've had practice, Chen said, with the same dry smile that Ithrik Voss had been cataloging since the first meeting on the plateau. We had 41 months of practice at doing necessary things slowly and without visible progress and continuing anyway. Is that a threat? It's an explanation. Chen poured from the thermos. He always had the thermos and looked at the fleet executor across the table. You built an empire on the logic that you could outlast anyone, make the cost high enough, hold the pressure long enough, and eventually the calculus shifts and they stop. We are telling you that we are the species that does not make that calculus. We're not threatening you. We're just explaining that the tool you used on us, that you've used for 11,000 years, doesn't work on everyone, and you need to update your model. The fleet, Davanrel said, in the outer system if negotiations fail. The fleet is not a threat, Chen said. The fleet is evidence. It's the answer to a question you've been asking since Varath Khan flagged the beacon. He set down his cup. The question is, how? How do you survive 11 billion down to 480,000 and then rebuild? And find 41 other civilizations and coordinate 17 of them and assemble a fleet in 4 years in the dark between stars? And the answer is the same answer it's always been. He looked at Davinrel steadily. We don't stop. When it's impossible, we don't stop. When the loss is catastrophic, we don't stop. When the logical, rational, efficient thing to do is to accept the outcome and conserve remaining resources. He paused. We don't stop. And after 41 months of not stopping, we had the map of everything you thought was gone. Davinrel was silent. That's the only advantage we've ever had, Chen said. We're not stronger than you. We're not smarter. We don't have better technology, obviously. He almost smiled. We just have a very bad relationship with the word asterisk enough. The treaty was signed in the 14th month. It was, by Keth standards, generous. By human standards, it was the minimum necessary. The distinction between those two things occupied the next decade of political theory within the Dominion's academic class, and ultimately proved to be one of the most productive misunderstandings the galaxy had seen in several centuries. Ilara Voss was there for the signing. She stood in the back of the room and didn't sign anything and didn't speak, but she was there, which was the point. Ithrek Voss, who had been reassigned 3 times in the past year and had followed the negotiation as a kind of personal obsession, found her afterward in the corridor outside the signing chamber. The weapon, he said, on the day we landed in the field, you had it slung over your shoulder, but you weren't pointing it. You weren't threatening. You were demonstrating that you had it. She tilted her head, smart. What would you have done if we'd been hostile, on that first day? One woman with a projectile weapon against a Keth contact team. She looked at him for a moment. I'd have made it cost as much as possible, she said, and then someone else would have come out of the tree line. She started walking, and then someone else after that. He watched her go. He thought about the sensor reading that had come back 6,714, and the city hidden in the trees, and the 17 beacon signals dismissed over 38 months, and the fleet in the outer dark, and 14 months of a negotiation paced by people who had made a decision early on that there was no number, no loss, no amount of darkness between the stars that would make them decide it wasn't worth it anymore. He thought about what kind of species broadcasts a heartbeat into empty space for 3 years without knowing if anyone is listening. He thought, we spent 11,000 years afraid of the wrong things. In the Keth Dominion's historical archive, the file on Earth was eventually reopened and redesignated. The original classification, non-recoverable, extinction confirmed, file closed, was struck through. The replacement classification took the archivists 3 weeks to agree on, because nothing in their existing taxonomy fit precisely. They considered asterisk resilient. They considered asterisk anomalous. They considered several technical terms related to civilizational persistence under suppression. They settled, finally, on a classification that had never been used before. That required a special notation explaining it was a new category created specifically for this case, that would go on to be applied to 41 other open files across the next 50 years. The notation read, Classification Unresolved. The annotation below it, authored by Varath Khan and the only part of the file she ever allowed to carry her name, said simply, this civilization's extinction was assessed on the assumption that sufficient loss produces sufficient reason to stop. The assessment was structurally sound. The species was not. She never added to it. She didn't need to. Somewhere on the 3rd planet of a small star in an unremarkable system, in a forest that still looked like a forest from above, someone was building something. Carefully, slowly, without announcement, without waiting for permission. As they always had.